Welcome to the Hot News Channel, where we strip away the noise to analyze today's breaking stories. It is Sunday, the 1st of March, 2026.
You are witnessing a pivotal moment in modern history. I mean, the geopolitical chessboard hasn't just been flipped, it's been set on fire. What we are looking at is the first 24 hours of a massive, unprovoked regional war that threatens to swallow the global economy whole.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because my head is absolutely spinning from the sheer volume of data we've been processing since yesterday morning. Our mission for this deep dive is to try and sift through this incredibly dense fog of war. We are going to analyze the hard data, synthesize what are, frankly, some wildly conflicting international field reports, and try to uncover the hidden truths behind the U.S. and Israeli strikes on Iran.
Right.
And, of course, Iran's unprecedented and, frankly, shocking rapid retaliation. The map of the Middle East we all woke up to on Friday, it simply doesn't exist anymore. We need to understand exactly how we got to this entirely new reality in the span of just one single day.
And before we get into the granular tactical specifics, we really need to speak directly to you, the listener. In this deep dive, you will hear highly charged political and military claims from all sides. From Washington to Tel Aviv to Tehran.
Yeah.
We want to be crystal clear right up front. We are strictly impartial analysts.
Exactly.
We do not endorse any of the viewpoints, justifications, or political ideologies you are about to hear. Our sole objective is to report the factual data and convey the ideas contained in our intelligence briefings so you can understand the reality on the ground.
Absolutely. So let's start by looking at the tactical rollout of this initial offensive, because the timeline itself tells a story. The operation officially began around 2 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Saturday, February 28, 2026.
Right.
But here's the detail that immediately jumped out at me when I was reviewing the raw field reports. They waited until daylight in the Middle East to launch these strikes.
Yeah, that is...
It feels entirely counterintuitive, right? I mean, you look at the code names. The U.S. operation is dubbed Epic Fury, and the Israeli counterpart is Roaring Lion. It sounds incredibly aggressive, yet they chose to execute it when everyone could literally see them coming. They targeted military installations, critical radar sites, the presidential compound of Masoud Pezeshkian, and the compound of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. But why broad daylight?
Well, it is a massive deviation from standard operating procedure, and you're right to catch that. Historically, in modern kinetic warfare, if you look at Desert Storm or the shock and awe campaigns of the early 2000s, you strike under the cover of darkness.
Always.
Always. You want to maximize stealth, disorient the enemy, and minimize the effectiveness of their optical anti-aircraft defenses. Choosing to launch a massive aerial and missile bombardment in broad daylight is a deliberate, highly calculated signal.
A signal of what, though?
It suggests one of two things. Either an absolute, unshakable confidence in total air superiority, essentially saying, we don't care if you see us, you can't stop us. Or, and I think this is much more likely, it is designed for maximum psychological impact. They wanted the visible, inescapable destruction to be witnessed by the millions of people waking up, getting their coffee, and starting their day.
Wow. Well, the civilian population absolutely saw it, and tragically, they felt it. I want to look at the hard data regarding the casualties because it is devastating, and it fundamentally contradicts the official press briefings coming out of Washington.
It completely contradicts them.
Right. The stated objective from the Pentagon was the targeting of ballistic missile facilities and top leadership nodes, but the field reports we are getting indicate over 200 people were killed in these initial strikes. And there's one data point that I just cannot shake.
So,
yes. A direct strike on an elementary school in the city of Minab. 63 schoolgirls were killed in that single location. Plus, we have confirmed reports of strikes leveling residential apartment blocks right in the middle of Tehran. Are we supposed to believe a precision strike in 2026 accidentally hits a school right as kids are arriving?
that is the exact question that international observers are struggling with right now. When you look at the sophisticated munitions being used by the U.S. and Israel, the margin of error is supposedly measured in mere feet.
Exactly. They can drop a bomb down a smokestack.
Right. So when an elementary school is obliterated at the precise hour children are gathering, or when residential towers are flattened, it forces us to question the strategic value and the international legality of these targets. According to the analysis by Mohammed Morandi, these strikes look less like precision military operations aimed at degrading military capability and far more like calculated attempts to incite panic, chaos, and terror among the populace.
The terrorism.
Morandi's analysis suggests this is a deliberate doctrine of psychological attrition. It's an attempt to break the will of the civilian population so severely that they internally fracture and turn against their own government. You don't hit an apartment block to destroy a centrifuge. You hit it to destroy societal cohesion.
But history shows that bombing civilians usually has the exact opposite effect, right? I mean,
Yeah.
look at the Blitz in World War II. It hardens resolve. We'll get to the Iranian public's reaction later, but I want to stay on this psychological warfare angle for a second, because the intelligence gap that opened up immediately after the strikes was wild.
Oh, the misinformation was staggering.
Within hours of the bombs hitting the leadership compounds, Israeli intelligence began aggressively circulating claims that Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei had been killed. And what fascinated me was how quickly the financial sector weaponized this rumor. I was looking at prediction markets, specifically Polymarket. The odds of the Ayatollah's death spiked to an 80% probability almost instantly.
80%.
Yeah, billions of dollars were essentially betting on an assassination in real time.
The gamification of global conflict in real time is a truly dystopian element of this war. But let's look at why that rumor was seeded so aggressively in the first place. Claiming the head of state is dead is a classic, textbook psychological operation. The goal is to paralyze the enemy's chain of command, sow confusion among the ranks, and completely demoralize their frontline fighters who are relying on those leadership nodes for direction.
Make them hesitate.
Exactly. If the man at the top is gone, who is giving the orders to launch the counterattack, it forces the adversary to spend critical hours proving they are still alive rather than organizing a cohesive defense.
Except the Iranians didn't waste hours. They killed the rumor almost instantly. I was watching the international feeds, and Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araki literally went on NBC American television to confirm that the Ayatollah, the president, the head of the judiciary, and the top Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps commanders were all perfectly safe and sound.
The speed at which they countered that psyop was remarkable.
It really was. He explicitly stated that while a couple of mid-level commanders might have been lost, the central nervous system of the state was entirely intact. It completely deflated the Polymarket bubble and the narrative momentum of the strike.
It did, and it demonstrated that Iran's communications infrastructure survived the initial wave untouched. But if the leadership is intact, we have to look at what the U.S. was actually demanding in the aftermath. Because the political rhetoric coming out of Washington right after the bombs fell created a profoundly confusing strategic picture.
Confusing is an understatement. Let's talk about President Donald Trump's 8-minute address from Mar-a-Lago, which outlined what epic fury was supposed to achieve. It was absolutist. He demanded total surrender from the IRGC, promising them complete immunity if they immediately laid down their arms. He then bypassed the government entirely and spoke directly to the Iranian people, telling them to stay in their shelters until the bombing stops and then to take over your government. But his stated military goals were what really caught my eye. The complete obliteration of Iran's nuclear program, the total destruction of their missile industry, and the annihilation of their navy.
Now, play devil's advocate here for a moment. If you are the Pentagon, setting absolute goals like that provides a clear mandate for sustained, limitless military action.
Right, but the justification for that mandate makes absolutely no logical sense if you look at the administration's own timeline. Think back to just 8 months ago, following that 12-day war in June 2025. President Trump stood at a podium and publicly claimed that Iran's nuclear program was completely obliterated. He used that exact word.
Yes, he did.
So my question is, how can a fully obliterated nuclear program suddenly, 8 months later, pose such an imminent existential threat that it requires a massive, unprovoked regional war? You cannot obliterate a nuclear program twice.
You absolutely cannot, and that glaring contradiction is at the very heart of the critical pushback we are seeing from veteran military analysts today. According to the analysis by Daniel Davis and Scott Ritter, there is a massive logical flaw being utilized to justify this escalation.
What's their take?
Their analysis points out that the physical realities of nuclear enrichment simply do not allow a completely destroyed program to be rebuilt to a threat level requiring a regional war in less than a year. It takes years to spin up centrifuges, acquire the raw materials, and refine them to weapons grade. What this heavily suggests, and what Davis and Ritter argue, is that this is a manufactured regime change war masquerading as a counterproliferation strike.
And the diplomatic context makes it look even more manufactured. I was digging into the State Department movements from last week. We had negotiations mediated by the Omani foreign minister scheduled to take place on Monday in Vienna. We're talking about today.
The timing is impossible to ignore.
Furthermore, the intelligence briefings I reviewed indicated that Iran had reportedly already agreed to a major sweeping concession. They were preparing to send their enriched uranium to the United States. They were literally at the negotiating table, ready to hand over the material. Why on earth would you launch a massive kinetic regime change war 48 hours before a major diplomatic breakthrough?
Because, tragically, diplomacy might have removed the justification for the kinetic action. If Iran hands over the enriched uranium, the narrative of an imminent nuclear threat evaporates overnight. Choosing to launch Epic Fury 48 hours before the Vienna summit is a highly calculated, deliberate choice to prioritize conflict over resolution.
They wanted the war.
It ensures the war happens before peace can break out. The consequence of that choice is what we saw next, because Iran did not hesitate for a second.
They didn't hesitate at all, and the sheer velocity of their response is terrifying. Let's pivot to exactly how Iran reacted, which they dubbed Khatam al-Tufan, translating to the finale of the flood. I want to contextualize this for you, the listener. During that 12-day war back in June 2025, it took Iran roughly 18 hours to recalibrate, assess the damage, and launch a counteroffensive. That's a normal military lag time.
It takes time to assess battle damage and draw up target packages.
Exactly. This time, the retaliation was nearly instantaneous. They launched dozens of ballistic missiles and drones, not just at Israel, but critically at U.S. military bases spread across the entire Gulf. We have hard data confirming direct strikes on the Al Udeid base in Qatar, the Ali Al Salem base in Kuwait, Al Dhafra in the United Arab Emirates, the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet headquarters in Bahrain, and a power facility in Erbil, Iraq.
The compression of that timeline from 18 hours down to instant retaliation is the most vital data point of the first 24 hours. It tells us two very important things. First, the Iranian military infrastructure, specifically their subterranean command and control networks, was completely unfazed by the initial U.S. and Israeli strikes.
The U.S. didn't hit the right targets, or they couldn't reach them.
Right. Second, and more importantly, they didn't have to scramble to draw up a target list. They had a massive regional contingency plan already loaded into launch tubes, waiting for a pretext. By instantly targeting bases in Qatar, Kuwait, the UAE, and Bahrain, Iran fundamentally rewrote the rules of engagement for the Middle East. They were no longer treating this as an isolated, localized conflict with Israel. They were immediately widening the theater of war to encompass the entire regional security architecture.
And the tactical weaponry they used to do this reveals a highly sophisticated, almost cold-blooded strategy. I want to zero in on one specific confirmed target because it highlights the financial and tactical asymmetry here, the FPS-132 radar station in Qatar.
Oh, this is a huge blow.
It's a staggering loss for the Pentagon. We are talking about a $1.1 billion U.S. military asset with a 5,000-kilometer range. It's the eyes and ears of the entire regional defense grid. And Iran completely destroyed it, just wiped $1 billion off the board in minutes.
Destroying the FPS-132 isn't just a financial loss. It physically blinds the early warning systems for the entire Gulf. But how they managed to slip past the Patriot batteries and the Iron Dome to hit these targets is where the real tactical genius and the nightmare for Western defense contractors lies. We need to look closely at the underlying missile chess match here. According to the analysis by Elijah Magnier, Iran executed a strategy that is totally counterintuitive. You would think in a massive retaliatory strike, you would lead with your absolute best, fastest, most cutting-edge weaponry, right?
You'd want to hit them before they know what's happening. Lead with the hypersonics. Don't give them time to react.
It's exactly.
Yeah.
But according to Magnier's analysis, Iran did the exact opposite. They deliberately initiated their counteroffensive using their older, slower, legacy ballistic missiles. We are talking about models that take roughly 10 to 12 minutes to traverse the airspace and reach their targets in Israel. They essentially sent their oldest, clunkiest tech first.
Oh.
Why?
Yeah.
Because the goal of that first wave wasn't necessarily to hit the targets. The goal was to force the U.S. Patriot batteries and the Israeli Iron Dome to wake up, track the incoming bogies, and expend their multi-million-dollar interceptors. Iran was intentionally over-flooding the defensive airspace with cheap decoys.
That is wild. They're essentially bankrupting the defensive shields. If a Patriot interceptor costs, what, $3 to $4 million a pop?
At least.
And Iran is firing a swarm of missiles that cost maybe $100,000 each. The math is completely unsustainable for the U.S.
It's financial and logistical attrition. And once those interceptor stockpiles are physically depleted, or the computer systems are simply overwhelmed by the sheer volume of incoming targets and run out of launch tubes, that is when the trap springs. That is when Iran began introducing their highly advanced modern ballistic missiles. These advanced systems travel at incredible velocities, striking their targets in just 5 to 6 minutes, leaving virtually zero reaction time for the now depleted defense systems. And the most chilling part of Manguier's analysis, he asserts that Iran hasn't even played its best cards yet. They are holding their most devastating hypersonic weaponry in reserve, pacing their escalation.
Which means the umbrella of invincibility that these Gulf nations have relied on for decades is just gone. This strategy is literally shattering the illusion of safety in the region. And it's not just the military bases taking the hits. This is where the economic reality slams into the listener. We have field reports confirming strikes well outside of traditional expected military zones. I'm talking about a Shahed drone directly striking the Palm Jumeirah Hotel in Dubai.
A luxury tourist destination.
Exactly. We've had explosions reported in the immediate vicinity of the Burj Khalifa, the tallest building in the world and the crown jewel of UAE real estate. Furthermore, the civilian passenger airport terminal in Kuwait was hit.
And we have to ask ourselves, why there? Why spend munitions hitting a luxury hotel or an airport terminal? By hitting these specific landmarks, Iran is sending a chilling, unambiguous message to the Arab monarchies that host United States military forces. The message is simple. Your economic stability, your massive multi-billion-dollar tourism industry, and your perceived safety are now collateral damage. You cannot host the U.S. military, allow them to launch strikes from your soil, and expect your civilian economy to remain untouched in a sterilized bubble.
It's brilliant in a dark way.
Think about the implications for you, the listener, if your pension or 401k is tied to international markets. If you were a global investor, a hedge fund manager, or a multinational corporation, would you keep your money parked in Dubai today? The psychological barrier of safety has been completely breached. Capital flight is going to be immense.
And it's not just Iran applying this pressure. The entire region is mobilizing at a terrifying pace. We have confirmed reports that Yemen's Ansarallah, commonly referred to in the West as the Houthis, has officially joined the war. They haven't just offered verbal support, they have already launched a massive missile salvo aimed directly at Israel.
This is the synchronization of the axis of resistance. It proves that Iran does not fight alone. They fight as part of a highly coordinated network of regional state and non-state actors. But the escalation is happening on both sides. We also have intelligence indicating that Saudi Arabia, which had previously tried to maintain a delicate neutrality, has officially opened its airspace to both the United States and Israel, allowing their fighter jets to utilize Saudi skies for strike operations.
That's a massive shift.
It is the match in the powder barrel. It effectively pulls the entire Arabian Peninsula into the conflict. There are no standers left. The airspace is contested, the borders are porous to missile fire, and the entire Middle Eastern theater is now a fully active free-fire zone.
Which perfectly sets the stage for what I think is the most terrifying economic data point of the entire day. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps has officially announced the complete closure of the Strait of Hormuz.
This is the nightmare scenario for the global economy. We really need to break down the physical and mathematical reality of what that closure actually means for the listener. The Strait of Hormuz is essentially a narrow geographical bottleneck between the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. It's the single most important economic artery on the entire planet. Roughly 20% of the world's total daily oil consumption passes through that narrow choke point.
20%.
When Iran turns off that valve, which they can do easily with anti-ship missiles and sea mines, the global supply chain goes into immediate violent cardiac arrest. Financial analysts are predicting an instantaneous spike in global oil prices, rocketing past $100 per barrel almost immediately.
And the ripple effects of that are unimaginable. It's not just about paying more at the gas pump. Petroleum is in everything. Plastics, fertilizer, shipping logistics, aviation fuel, the cost of everything goes up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
According to the analysis by Peter Schiff, the macroeconomic consequences are nothing short of catastrophic. We're looking at massive, hyperinflationary pressures cascading through every sector of the economy. Schiff warns that if this closure is sustained for even a few weeks, the cost of raw materials, international transportation, and basic consumer goods will skyrocket. He painted a grim picture, suggesting we might see a reality of a $30 Big Mac.
$30 for a burger.
While that sounds hyperbolic, it illustrates how deeply energy costs are baked into the price of cheap, everyday items. But the deeper threat is structural. This level of sudden economic shock could cause the United States' national debt, which is already incredibly fragile, to violently spiral past $39 trillion as borrowing costs explode. The global economy simply cannot absorb the sudden loss of 20% of its energy supply without facing severe, perhaps permanent structural damage.
And if you are the United States, your immediate instinct is to say, fine, we'll use the Navy to force the strait open. But enforcing that opening requires absolute naval dominance, and the hard data we have today suggests the U.S. Armada is incredibly vulnerable. We have shocking reports confirming a U.S. Navy combat support vessel has been heavily damaged by Iranian strikes. Furthermore, massive swarms of Iranian suicide drones have been actively deployed toward the USS Abraham Lincoln. And then there's the highly precarious, almost absurd state of the USS Gerald Ford.
The situation with the Ford is a perfect microcosm of broader systemic failures.
It really is. The Gerald Ford is currently parked in Haifa, Israel. It has been deployed for over 240 days. From what I understand, that is far beyond its standard operational window. It hasn't had a proper refit or maintenance period in nearly a year. Field reports are even indicating that the ship is suffering from severely broken sanitation systems on board. We have the crown jewel of the American Navy, a multi-billion-dollar supercarrier, sitting in a combat zone with overflowing toilets and exhausted sailors.
It completely shatters the deeply held post-WWII paradigm of American naval invincibility. You cannot project imperial power with a broken fleet. According to the analysis by Karen Kwiatkowski, a former Pentagon official, the U.S. military is currently operating under severe, critical logistical constraints that the public is largely unaware of. We are dealing with dangerously depleted munition stockpiles. Why? Because of the massive ongoing military aid provided to Ukraine over the past few years.
We gave away the reserves.
We have sent our surplus and, in some cases, our primary reserves to Eastern Europe. Kwiatkowski argues that you cannot fight a multi-front, high-intensity kinetic conflict without a robust, incredibly deep supply chain. The United States simply does not have the necessary logistics tail, the constant, uninterrupted supply of jet fuel, advanced interceptors, replacement parts, and sustained maintenance capabilities. It just doesn't exist at the scale required to survive a prolonged war of attrition with Iran, especially when their premier aircraft carriers are sitting ducks in the Eastern Mediterranean with failing vital systems.
It seems like the Pentagon is acutely aware of the changing nature of war, even if their legacy systems like the aircraft carriers are struggling to adapt. Look at the bureaucratic moves happening right now. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has actively pushed to officially rename the Department of Defense back to its original WWII-era moniker, the Department of War. He stated publicly that this is to signal a shift toward lethal, unconstrained force. Concurrently, the Pentagon is reportedly putting in standing orders to buy 1 million drones a year. 1 million.
1 million drones a year represents a fundamental shift in how the U.S. plans to fight, moving away from exquisite, expensive manned platforms to cheap, attritable mass. But it also raises a profoundly uncomfortable question about the true motivations behind this conflict. We have to look at the financial incentives driving these policy shifts. According to the analysis by Matthew Ho and Ray McGovern, we need to debate whether this entire war, regardless of the high-minded geopolitical goals stated in Mar-a-Lago, functions primarily as a massive multi-trillion-dollar grift for the military-industrial complex.
You mean creating the demand to justify the supply?
Exactly. When the Pentagon rebrands to the Department of War and commits to buying 1 million drones annually, they are not preparing for a quick victory. They are signaling a permanent state of high-intensity, limitless conflict. That kind of permanent war footing requires constant, astronomical funding to replenish deliberately depleted stockpiles and develop next-generation weaponry. And who pays for that? The American taxpayer. Ho and McGovern's analysis points to this being a massive wealth transfer from the middle class to defense contractors, justified by a state of perpetual manufactured conflict.
Which forces us to look backward. We have to look at what was happening back home, domestically, right before the missiles flew on Saturday morning. I'm going to drop a bombshell detail regarding the timeline that is largely being ignored by the mainstream coverage. Exactly 10 hours, just 10 hours. Before the bombing of Iran began, former President Bill Clinton gave a formal, closed-door deposition to the House Oversight Committee regarding his long-standing, heavily scrutinized relationship with Jeffrey Epstein.
In high-level politics, there are very few true coincidences. A 10-hour window between a catastrophic domestic political deposition and the launch of a massive regional war forces us to intensely debate the timing. The concept of wag the dog launching a foreign conflict to distract the domestic populace from an internal scandal is an old, cynical playbook. But we have to ask if we are seeing it executed in real time. The critical analysis circulating in independent channels right now asks a very dark, uncomfortable question. Is the elite Epstein class in Washington utilizing a global, catastrophic military conflict to completely bury deeply damaging domestic scandals? Think about the media environment today. When the news cycle is absolutely dominated by burning aircraft carriers, ballistic missile swarms, and closed Strait of Hormuz, absolutely nobody is talking about the House Oversight Committee or flight logs.
Nobody at all. It's completely vanished from the front pages. It makes you wonder if that was the entire point, especially when you look at the public sentiment. Polling leading up to this weekend indicated that only 20% of the U.S. public actually supports a war with Iran. It is wildly unpopular across both sides of the political aisle. Launching a major kinetic war when 80% of your population is against it makes the timing of its launch even more suspicious.
And when you have an incredibly unpopular war that you are determined to launch anyway, you have to manufacture consent. You have to create a narrative that terrifies the public into submission. We saw a massive coordinated effort to do exactly that in the media right before the strikes occurred.
Oh, absolutely. I was tracking the media narrative on Friday evening, specifically pointing to Fox News and commentators like Sean Hannity. Just hours before the war officially began, they were aggressively pushing a hyper-sensationalized story about an alleged, highly coordinated Iran-linked operative attempting to assassinate Donald Trump. It was wall-to-wall coverage of this imminent, terrifying threat.
If we dissect this media strategy, it is a textbook, almost copy-paste example of manufacturing consent. It is eerily reminiscent of the weapons of mass destruction narrative deployed in 2003 to justify the invasion of Iraq. Create an imminent, visceral threat to the homeland to justify a pre-planned foreign invasion. According to the highly critical analysis by John Kiriakou, a former CIA officer, the intelligence being pushed to the public claims that Iran is an imminent nuclear threat, trying to assassinate American leaders, and is preparing to nuke U.S. cities is entirely fabricated. It's WMD 2.0. Kiriakou points out a glaring, undeniable physical impossibility in these narratives. Iran does not even possess a ballistic delivery mechanism capable of traveling the 7,000 miles required to strike the continental United States. The threat profile was artificially drastically inflated to justify a pre-planned kinetic operation to a deeply skeptical public.
So if we pull all of this together, we have a potentially manufactured justification built on fabricated intelligence, an incredibly unpopular war, a deeply suspicious domestic timeline, and an incredibly difficult, perhaps impossible, tactical landscape. Let's look at the ultimate objective they stated: regime change. We are talking about attempting to overthrow the government of a mountainous, deeply complex country of 90 million people, a nation equipped with vast, deeply entrenched underground missile cities that are virtually impervious to standard bunker-busting munitions. It feels like a suicide mission for American foreign policy.
To conclude this debate, we must look at the psychological and demographic reality on the ground inside Iran today, because that is where the architects of this war made their most fatal miscalculation. Mohammad Marandi, in his analysis, specifically cited a famous quote from the late General Qasem Soleimani. Years ago, Soleimani directly called Donald Trump a gambler. Marandi's analysis argues that Trump had literally bet his entire presidency, the legacy of the American military, and potentially the entire global economy on the hope of a fast, clean collapse of the Iranian government. He waged a massive bet that the Iranian people would cheer the bombs, rise up, and do the fighting for him. But the hard data from the last 24 hours proves the exact opposite is happening.
The numbers coming out of Tehran are staggering.
They are. In just the first 24 hours of this conflict, over 2 million Iranians volunteered to join the armed forces. When faced with an unprovoked external aggression that bombs their schools in Minab and levels their apartment buildings in Tehran, the nation has unified. They are rallying around the flag, putting aside internal political grievances to face an external existential threat. By attempting a quick surgical regime change, the U.S. has inadvertently galvanized the Iranian populace, united the axis of resistance, and backed itself into a strategically unwinnable corner from which there is no easy exit.
We have covered an immense amount of ground today, and the sheer scale of this crisis is difficult to fully process. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to look right at you, the listener, with the ultimate takeaway you need to remember as you navigate the news for the rest of the week. The era of consequence-free regime change operations is over. By launching an unprovoked war without a viable exit strategy or the logistical capability to sustain it, the U.S. and Israel have united an entire region against them, exposing critical vulnerabilities in their military and economic armor that will irreversibly change the global balance of power.
And as we end, I want to leave you with a final chilling concept to ponder, something we haven't even touched on yet, but which will dictate the future of this conflict. Consider the new reality of asymmetrical economic warfare. Iran doesn't need to defeat the U.S. military in a head-to-head battle. If they simply keep the Strait of Hormuz closed and continue dropping cheap drones onto luxury hotels in Dubai, they can bleed the Western financial system dry without ever invading an inch of foreign soil. Are you prepared to live in a world where the stock market is held hostage by a $20,000 drone?
If you found this analysis valuable, hit the plus or follow button on your podcast app and give us a like. Subscribe to the Hot News channel for more deep dives. Until we meet again, goodbye.